Somewhere today, a parliament is voting on a law. A court is settling who inherits a title that still exists in a few countries. Entire legal systems exist just to answer one question: who gets to lead and how did they earn the right? See, for most of the time humans have existed, none of that machinery existed. No elections, no kings, no constitutions, no office of leader that a person could inherit or seize. People still hunted together, raised children together, defended territory together, and survived together for hundreds of thousands of years without anyone standing permanently above the group. That sounds impossible if you assume hierarchy is the natural resting state of any group of people. But anthropologists, archaeologists, and researchers have all converged on a picture that says otherwise. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Farming began about 12,000 years ago. Cities, kings, and written law show up only about 5,000 years ago. Compress all of human existence into a single day, and agriculture starts around 11:05 at night. Kings and states arrive in the final 2 minutes. For more than 95% of the time our species has existed, humans lived in small mobile groups with no formal chief and no royal family. So what filled that gap for a few 100,000 years? Anthropologists have tried to answer that by studying the small number of hunting and gathering societies that survived into the modern era. Groups like the Hadza of Tanzania, the Mbuti of the Congo, and the Xkungsan of the Kalahari Desert. All of these groups have changed since the Stone Age, shaped by contact with farmers, colonial governments, and modern states. But the patterns researchers found across dozens of these groups are consistent enough to say something real about how humans organize without a state pressing down on them. They went looking for chiefs, but they didn't find any. The anthropologist Christopher Boehm spent decades studying this and gave the pattern a name: reverse dominance. Every one of our closest primate relatives runs a standard dominance hierarchy. A chimpanzee troop is controlled by one male or a small coalition of males through size, strength, and threat, while the rest of the group submits. Boehm found that human foraging bands built the opposite arrangement on purpose. The group works together continuously to keep any one person from rising above the rest. The mechanism runs in stages. First comes ridicule. Someone brags about a kill or starts handing out orders like they've earned the right to, and the group mocks the behavior until it stops. When ridicule doesn't work, the group moves to silence, refusing to answer the person or acknowledge they exist, which is a serious punishment in a group where everyone depends on everyone else for survival. The group can push out persistent offenders entirely, and a lone forager rarely lasts long in a hostile landscape. In the most extreme cases, a group would kill someone who tried to seize permanent control over the others. In 1968, the anthropologist Richard Lee was living with the Kungsan in the Kalahari and wanted to thank them for a year of hospitality. He bought a large ox and had it slaughtered for a Christmas feast, expecting gratitude. Instead, for days, the group told him the ox was worthless, thin, barely worth the effort of butchering. Confused and a little stung, he eventually asked a man named Hakikgosi why. The answer was that when a young hunter brings back a big kill and starts acting important because of it, the group tells him the kill was nothing. Every single time, on purpose, so he never gets the idea that one good hunt makes him better than anyone else. Lee had bought himself the exact treatment reserved for a boastful hunter, because to the group, a gift that large looked like someone trying to buy standing. People who study foragers call this custom insulting the meat. It keeps a skilled hunter from turning one lucky kill into lasting authority over the group, and it happens to the best hunters most, since they have the most opportunities to start believing the group owes them something. However, none of this means there was no leadership at all. There was, but it looked nothing like a king or president. Authority in a foraging band was earned task by task and evaporated the moment the task ended. The best tracker led during a hunt and took orders from no one once the hunt was over. A respected elder known for settling disputes might have the whole camp deferring to her judgment for an evening, then go back to gathering firewood the next morning like everyone else. Societies studied throughout the 20th century in Melanesia show a similar arrangement where a person builds influence by giving away food and goods and by being persuasive in argument. But the influence carries no title, and it can vanish the moment the person stops delivering. No child inherits it, and no one can pass it to a son. The obvious question is why a species would spend hundreds of thousands of years building a system specifically designed to prevent dominance. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has one of the most detailed answers, and it reaches back further than any known human culture. Wrangham separates aggression into two kinds. Reactive aggression is hot and impulsive, a sudden explosion of temper. Proactive aggression is cold and planned in advance. Chimpanzees run high on both. Humans in daily life run low on reactive aggression, calmer and more tolerant of frustration than any wild ape, even while remaining capable of coordinated violence on a scale no other primate approaches. Wrangham's explanation for that gap is called the execution hypothesis. Once early, humans developed language, ordinary members of a group gained an ability they never had before: the power to plan together in secret. A single bully, however strong, cannot fight off 10 people who already agreed on what they were going to do. For hundreds of thousands of years, coalitions of humans used that advantage to identify the most aggressive members of their group and kill them through planned executions carried out by people who had talked it through beforehand. Repeat that pattern across enough generations, and it removes certain genes from the population every time it happens. Wrangham argues this occurred often enough across 12,000 generations to reshape the temperament of the entire species. The instinct in you that flinches at someone acting too dominant, that feels anger at a boss who plays favorites, that wants to see an arrogant person humbled, developed over hundreds of thousands of years of exactly this kind of selection. Our species may be as cooperative and as tolerant as it is partly because, for most of its history, people killed the ones who refused to cooperate. If this picture of enforced equality is accurate, the archaeological record should show it. Bury 100 people from a genuinely egalitarian band, and you should find the same treatment for all of them. Similar effort, similar grave goods. For the vast majority of the Paleolithic, that is exactly what the graves show. But at least once, they don't. In 1955, quarry workers near Vladimir, Russia, uncovered a site called Sungir, dated to about 34,000 years ago. Among the burials were two children, 10 and 12 years old, laid head-to-head in a single grave. Around their bodies were more than 10,000 carved mammoth ivory beads, dozens of ivory armbands, hundreds of fox teeth, and 16 ivory spears, some over 2 meters long. Experiments recreating the beadwork suggest a single bead took close to an hour of skilled labor to make. 10,000 beads represents thousands of hours of work, invested in two children who had not lived long enough to earn that kind of tribute through hunting, tracking, or leading anyone. An adult man buried nearby at the same site had roughly a third as many beads. If standing in this group depended purely on what a person contributed while alive, the adult should have had more, not less. The most likely explanation is not that these boys earned this treatment through anything they did in their short lives. It was that they were born into a family or a lineage whose position in the group did not depend on individual achievement, rank passed down rather than earned, more than 30,000 years before the first king, the first written law, or the first farm. It is one site, set against a much larger record, that still points toward equality as the norm. But it says something important. The instinct toward hierarchy that Boehm's leveling mechanisms were built to suppress never fully disappeared. It was being held down through ridicule, gossip, and execution for the entire length of the Paleolithic. Every so often, somewhere, it broke through anyway. Then there is a site that shouldn't exist under the old assumptions about how civilization works. For most of the 20th century, the standard model held that agriculture came first, then food surplus, then villages, then the specialists and priests a surplus could support, and only after all of that, monuments. In 1994, in southeastern Turkey, archaeologists began excavating a site called Göbekli Tepe that broke that sequence apart. Circular stone enclosures at the site, built around 9600 BC, hold pillars weighing up to 10 tons, quarried, carved, and dragged into place without wheels, without draft animals, and without a single trace of farming anywhere nearby. The people who built it were still hunting wild animals and gathering wild grain. There was no agricultural surplus funding any of this. Moving stone that heavy takes hundreds of people working together over a period of time, all of whom needed food, water, and organization while they worked. That level of coordination doesn't happen through elections or inherited rule. Researchers who study the site describe temporary authority built around ritual knowledge, the kind of respect a knowledgeable elder could earn for the length of a single project, dissolving again once the stones were set in place. Achieved authority at a scale nobody expected foragers could manage, task by task, with nothing left standing once the task was done. A few thousand years before Göbekli Tepe in the Levant, a culture called the Natufians did something almost no group of hunter-gatherers before them had done. They stayed in one place year-round, in villages built from stone foundations, without planting a single crop. Wild gazelle and wild cereal grasses grew so thick in the region that a mobile life was no longer necessary. Staying in one place changes how hierarchy works in a way that mobility never allowed. A moving band that gathers only enough food for the next few days has nothing worth hoarding and nothing worth guarding. A settled group storing wild grain in pits through an entire season has something that can be measured, controlled, and withheld from other people. Researchers who study the shift from foraging to farming point to this as the real hinge point where lasting inequality becomes possible. Once there is a granary, someone can decide who eats from it, and for the first time in the human story, that decision can outlast the person who made it. For most of the Paleolithic, humans ran a system built to punish anyone who tried to rule, long-running enough that some researchers think it reshaped human temperament at a biological level. That system kept inherited power rare for hundreds of thousands of years. At Sungir, it slipped, and a family found a way to pass status to children who had done nothing yet to earn it. Groups at Göbekli Tepe organized at a massive scale without any of that structure becoming permanent. Once people stopped moving and started storing food in one place, the leveling mechanisms that had worked stopped being enough on their own. That is the point where leadership became something a family could hold and pass down, rather than something a person earned and lost within a season. None of the older instincts vanished once farming states and kings finally arrived. The satisfaction of watching an arrogant coworker get humbled, the irritation at a boss who plays favorites, the suspicion toward anyone who wants power, all of it carries 300,000 years of practice behind it, still running underneath every argument about who gets to be in charge.